thanks, Allyson, for agreeing to talk and telling us about fair sharing.
Well, thank you for having me, Nikki. It's lovely to be here. And I see a few familiar names on the participant list. So hello to all of those that I know, and an extra special hello to all of those who I'm just meeting today. Here's the exciting part where I share my screen and you all get to tell me if you can see it. So if someone just wants to let me know, make sure they can see that first slide, please.
Yes, it's all working.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for the introduction, Nikki. I don't need to introduce myself now, and I shall just move straight on to talking about fair sharing. I have an outline prepared, and what I'm going to do first, just give you an idea of what fair sharing is, and then talk a little bit about viewing and editing and searching within fair sharing. Then I want to give you a little view of the extra features that fair sharing has and how it collaborates with other projects. And at the end, I'd like to give you a sneak peek of something that we have planned for maybe just the end of the summer and into the fall, something that we're hoping to start doing, which is community curation and the creation of community curators. So first of all, what is fair sharing? Well, our goal is to help people, that is database and standards developers and data policy developers, help them make their resource fair. We also want to help the people who might consume those resources to find them in the first place and to know that they'll definitely be getting the right thing and the right home for their data. So you've already seen, as I saw on the agenda, you've already spoken about the FAIR principles. So I've dropped that slide from my talk, but I will talk a little how they relate to fair sharing. So how can we help make your resource findable? Well, we use schema.org markup. We even use bioschemas. We have over 40 metadata fields for each of our records. Not all of them are required. And we also apply DOIs to our fair sharing records once your resource is described fully and you've got a maintainer for that record. We work in collaboration with DataCite and we get DOIs from there. In terms of accessibility, we like to help you advertise as much as possible. We want you to shout to the world how open you are, what your licensing issues, what your licensing is, your access protocols, and how people can submit to you or download from you. In terms of interoperability, we really love relationships between records because that means relationships between resources. And that means, and showing those collaborations by linking to other fair sharing records is a really good way to enrich your record in fair sharing. And reusability, well, all of the enrichment of a fair sharing record is good, but it's really all in aid of improving how people can find and reuse your resource. So all of the licensing, all of the relationships, everything works together to help people find and use that resource. This is the front page as it looks, but you guys are in a very elite group because within a matter of weeks, it is before everyone disappears on their summer holidays, we are introducing a brand new, shiny fair sharing website and whole new back end, whole new front end, and with some exciting new features, plus further features to be added down the line. So this is how it looks now. And at the top, you can see it talks about recommendations and collections. Don't worry about those for now. They're ways we group our records, and I'll explain them more later. Then you have a search bar, and then you have a summary of statistics for these things that are standards, databases, and policies. Data policies are records created by funders, journals, and any other organization that has a list of data standards and databases that they want to ensure that their community follows. Repository records in fair sharing just describe the knowledge bases and databases across all research areas so that to help people find them and make use of them. The final classification we have is community standards, and we have several subtypes for that. We have data formats, terminologies, guidelines, which are very often minimal information guidelines, and we have a smaller subset of record types that are identifier schemas and metrics. Things like the FAIR metrics are included in these records. And as I said before, the relationships between the records are what really provide a rich extra level of information to our users. So we can see fair sharing from two directions. The first is from the view of the consumers of the data. So there are researchers, our data stewards, our librarians, the people who run training courses. All of these people will use fair sharing to find the resources they need for their work. Then you also have the data producers and the standards producers. They're the ones who will come to fair sharing, make a login, and start creating records with the help of the curation team. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to ask either Nikki or even have a comment in the chat window about whether you guys are consumers primarily or producers primarily. And I can sort of tweak the rest of the talk in terms of viewing, editing, and searching based on what your primary use of fair sharing might be, whether it's to discover resources or whether it's to contribute them. So if you want to write consumer, or if you want to write producer, or if you just, Nikki, if you have a general idea, then that would help. Oh, contribute, thank you, that's good. I really like, and consumer, oh, both, yes. Mediator, oh, I love this. See, I can tell that there are some people who are either ontologists or want to creep their way into ontologizing, because there's a lot of really good words coming out here, and I feel classification coming on. So what I'll do is I'll just talk a little about both as I go on. So Melanie might recognize this record. This is the example record I'm going to take you through for viewing. This is the biosamples at the EBI record, of which Melanie is one of the maintainers. And what I'm going to show you is just highlight some of the information there so that you will understand what it looks like when you go to view your own resources later on. So at the top, we have a bunch of general information, stuff that you would really expect. We have free text descriptions, a country listing, the year the resource was created, and a home page. You also have a banner. You can look in the top right and see that there's a little ribbon that says recommended. You wouldn't necessarily be able to see through the screen that it says recommended, but trust me, that's what it says. And what that means is that biosamples has been recommended by at least one data policy. And if you look down in the bottom left of the screenshot, you'll see that actually biosamples has been recommended by 8 separate data policies. And so that really shows there's endorsement of the standard. You also have a number of controlled vocabulary fields. Some are ontologies, some are plain controlled vocabularies. And so you can add information about the subject area your resource is in, the knowledge domains, the taxonomy, if applicable, because fair sharing is about all research area, and that brings you right into engineering and social sciences and humanities, as well as the life sciences. This is a sneaky peek at the new website, the same part of the page in the new website. We've broadly gone with the record at the very top. Then we also have a publication DOI, and that is specified by our maintainer or our curation team as the publication that is the one you should use to cite the resource itself. Then we have a variety of provenance information as well as maintainer attribution. We also have a support area that provides for context, training materials, and extra support documentation. And then you have the list of those relationships between fair sharing records. Now this list is in our legacy site only visible as a plain list. But on the new site, and here's a screenshot of the new site, which also allows you to search through those relationships, you can also get a graph view. And this is the graph view of the biosamples record. And the red square is indicative of biosamples record itself. And then I've highlighted one of its near neighbors, which is Array Express. And that shows you all of its neighbors. And you can expand or collapse the graph. This is an interactive graph, but I'm never going to try to do a live demo on a talk like this. Now I'm going to just show you briefly the rest of the record because it's pretty much self-explanatory. You have access protocols, you have licensing information, you have attribution of funders and the record maintainers again. You also have the attribution of the specific grants if people put that information in. And at the very bottom, you have publications, okay? And the reason we put publications near the bottom is simply because the primary publication is right there at the very top, and all the rest that you might want to include are further down. We group our fair sharing records into collections. And those collections then get magically called recommendations and given a banner if they're linked with a data policy record. So if, for example, you wanted to look up and see what a recommendation looks like in the wild, these are some of the examples. I will show you a screenshot, however. This is the collection for the Elixir core data resources and deposition databases. On the left, you can see a record that looks very much like the other record types, but it basically stops there. Everything below that is just the list of FAIRsharing records that are a member of the Elixir core data resources. An inset into this screenshot is the graph that's displayed on the current legacy site. So although we don't have graphs for individual record types on the legacy site, we do for collections. We also have a nice screen that shows you some summary statistics that you can click through. This is a graph on the new system for a collection. I actually didn't screenshot the Elixir one. I screenshotted my favorite collection, which is the International Virtual Observatory Alliance collection, because I just love the graph and how this looks. But that gives you an idea of how the new graph looks for it. The first step for editing records is checking to see if you've already got a record in FAIRsharing for the resource you want. Here I'm searching for biosamples. And you see I'm carrying that example all the way through. And you see there's 9 results in the legacy system. These are all related to biosamples. And indeed, you can see the biosamples record. Third from the top is the one that I've been using as an example so far. It's a pretty standard interface. In the new system, we have a lot more, the ability to be a lot more fine-grained, but also the simple search at the top is always still there and accessible. So why would you want to create records in FAIRsharing? If you are a producer of a resource and you want to come to us and either create a record or you found your record already in FAIRsharing, but nobody owns it yet, nobody maintains it, and you'd like to claim ownership. What's the point behind it? Well, to help you and your resource be fair, we want to try to give you the best advertising possible. And so to do that, our curation team looks at every single record in FAIRsharing and we manually update it. But although we're good at what we do, you guys are the experts in your fields and you guys can provide the best metadata for your record. And so if you claim ownership and become a maintainer, your name gets printed in lights at the top, and we'll give you all the support you need to help you curate that record. And the benefits that more than just seeing your name on the FAIRsharing website is to help researchers and data stewards find your resource, and also to help journals and publishers understand and assess your resource by looking through the metadata. Everything that we do in relation to those metadata fields is about increasing the awareness and visibility of your resource. So this is a little bit of a short tutorial on what will happen if you go to edit a record. At the top, you've got a screenshot of the very top bar of the current FAIRsharing website, and the same along the bottom of this slide is the new FAIRsharing website. And you can see that there's an add content button for both. And when you do that on the current website, you'll get an information page that gives you a summary about each of the different record types. And at the bottom, you'll get the option to choose which record type you plan to make. On the new website, you can select the record type in the first edit screen. So we've bypassed that completely. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. So once you choose to build a new record, in this case, this is the edit field for a database record, you can see all of the fields to put in. It's a pretty standard web form. And to be honest, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on the web form itself, other than to show you where the different things are, because once you've seen one web form, you've seen most web forms. On the new website, it's just been updated and it's a lot easier to edit because each of the sections are in separate tabs rather than having to scroll down on the old website. So you scroll down on the old website and you get the search for all of our controlled vocabulary terms. This is taxonomy. Well, this in the old site, it's subjects, domains, and free text user tags. In the new site, you can also have one integrated search for all the taxonomy items too. And that looks like this. So here is a screenshot of our brand new squeaky clean website in terms of the search across controlled vocabularies. And you're given lots of information to help you guide your choice. So To wing our way through the rest of the edit interface and get to the more exciting stuff at the end, I will just cover how each of the different sections help you highlight the fairness of your resource. So this is the section that's called Associated Records that allows you to add any related databases or standards. In the legacy system, we can just say there is a relationship. However, in the new system, it's really exciting, and I'll show you a quick screenshot of that in a moment. You can actually label those relationships. And so you can get a lot more fine grained to help your user understand how your resource is linked to the others. And in fact, it was just the next bit. That's good. So you can see on the left of this is the screenshot of the new system, is our search window to find the resource we wish to link. And on the right, it's the list of existing associations. So you can search on the left and then you click on the green arrow, it pops across to the right after you select the type of relationship. Moving on down the edit record, you can have, there's this section here that covers associated tools, publications, and access points. So by providing information on the downloadable tools that your resource may have, you're increasing the usability of your resource. By adding your publications, you're more likely to have people find and also read more about your resource. And then the web services, that gives people access, quick guides and quick links through to the types of access you might have, programmatic access like API, Sparkle endpoints, or OAI PMH, which I can never say, I never know if I'm saying quite right or if I'm supposed to say it some other way. You have some additional fields. Remember, most of these are not mandatory. They're just there to help you provide a complete picture of your resource. You can talk about how you submit data and provide links to it. You can say how to download data and how to search and browse your data in the data processes. You provide your licensing in that license section, and you have support and training material links in the bottom half. Once you've made your changes, you click the big save button that's either at the top or the bottom. Well, it's at both the top and the bottom. You can choose which save button to use. And you'll be presented with this edit successful screen. And by clicking on the link at the end of that little sentence, you can go back to your record and see your changes and how they look. They won't be approved until someone from the curation team has had a chance to have a quick look at them and make sure you're not a bot from somewhere on the interwebs. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about, just very shortly, about the extra value add that FAIRsharing gives to a number of other, when we work as part of collaborations with other people. Now, some of that I didn't make a slide, was on the ontology side. So although we have internal ontologies for subjects and domains, the subject ontology is generally more widely applicable and might be something that, that people can use and collaborate on. We also, as Celia knows, and I saw her name in the list just now, participant list, we are also part of the Terms for Fair Skills group. And this is an ontology that's being developed by Jan Lefranc and Laura Malloy and Pete McQuilton and a few others, including me, when I have some time to squeeze in, because it's a lovely ontology and it's particularly about research training materials. And so it's about trying to annotate training materials to help them showcase their fairness. But going on, we have a number of third-party tools that we are involved with. And so these are tools that you might have seen something about in your webinar the past couple of days, or it might be something that you haven't seen yet, because there are quite a variety out there. So a growing number of data management plan, data stewardship, and fair assessment tools access FAIRsharing via an API, including these that you see here. And all of the URLs are there if you wish to have a look and see what they're doing at the moment. I wanted to give you a couple of very short screenshots of our data policies. So you can see here, you get summary statistics, excuse me, about the data policies. And you also can compare two different data policies. This one is a comparison of scientific data with PLOS. And you can see which standards they have in common and which databases they have in common, and essentially a Gantt chart. Oh, no, Venn diagram. I have too many Gantt charts because the new FAIRsharing website is coming up and we've got a giant Gantt chart. I meant Venn diagram. So community curation in the near future, once we get the new website out of the way, that's sort of something I'm really excited to be starting to work on. So a lot of our users come to us and they want to, they tell us that resources are missing from FAIRsharing and we add them. But often these guys are experts. So even if they're not developers of the resource itself, they're experts in their community, experts in their research area. And they would be really, really useful and would get a lot back from ensuring that their community is well represented in FAIRsharing. But we don't have a way for them to add records at the moment because our current policy is that a maintainer of a record needs to be one of the developers of the resource. So what we want to do is we want to help these communities have a more complete picture of their resources within FAIRsharing. And we can, if people would like to help, they can become a community curator. And they can manage whatever portion of the ecosystem of records within your domain of interest that they want to. And by manage, I don't mean spending hours poring over them. I just mean they'll have access to them. So if they see that something's not quite right, they can log in and spend 30 seconds or a minute just updating one of the records. The same way that our internal curation team does. And we even have been throwing around ideas like a leaderboard of community curators to try to help anything that can try to promote all the valuable work that community curation would be doing. So you guys could choose to add resources that you know should be in FAIRsharing but aren't, or if we identify resources that we think should be in FAIRsharing, we can ask you guys your opinions, and if it looks like a good thing to add, you guys could add them. So that's everything I wanted to cover. It's quite a lot, but I wanted to give you a sort of broad overview of FAIRsharing and what it does. And then if you have any specific questions on how to use it or how you personally should use it, then I'm very, very happy to answer them. And that's just some photos of everyone in the team. And thank you very much for listening.
Great, thanks, Allyson, for a grand tour through FAIRsharing. What we were hoping was that at some point by the end of today, that some of the groups will be actually doing this registration on FAIRsharing. So I have a couple of questions, but I'll open it up to the floor. If you have a question, just raise your hand, unmute, or write it in the chat. Let's see if I see any raised hands. So while we wait for anybody else's questions, you mentioned the training skills ontology. So I was just wondering if you have time to spare. We're going to be pushed out into breakout rooms, and one of them is the training one. I wonder if you could maybe, if Sarah agrees, if you could just come into that room and just give us sort of just a couple of minutes, just to describe that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, that's no problem. I can do that.
So I think it'll be relevant to our discussions.
Yeah,
so I had a question. Sorry, I had a question on the level of granularity of a record. So a record, I mean, a biosample you're saying is a record. A cohort is a collection of, potentially thousands of biosamples associated with data. Training materials can be a single lecture, a whole module, or a set of modules on a course. How do you decide at what level of granularity to register at versus doing a whole lot and then pulling them together in the collection?
Yes, it's hard because that's probably the most common question we get in FAIRsharing, because people will come to us, they see that FAIRsharing is listed in a journal data policy, and they'll come thinking they can deposit a particular individual data set with us, and we don't store data. So we just store information about resources themselves. So for example, as an individual item of training material would not be appropriate for inclusion within FAIRsharing, although you might wish to search for the topic that or the research area that your training covers and see what kind of resources might feed back and should be included in the training course. We have a link through our API with TESS. I said it wrong, TESS. And TESS is a repository for training material in the life sciences. And so you can search TESS through FAIRsharing when you're creating a record and include training material through there. But you couldn't, at the moment, our scope is databases, standards, and data policies. Now our standards have a variety of types, and sometimes it can get a little vague where the line is. But with cohort data specifically, we've been working with some COVID-19 dashboards with the WHO recently, and we're building a collection of records that describes those dashboards for the WHO. because I think they're working towards trying to figure out a little bit more about them and how they fit into FAIR. And I found it quite interesting because a lot of these data dashboards present a lot of really useful COVID-19 data, but they present it as conglomeration, anonymized summary statistics. And so historically, a lot of the FAIRsharing records have been all about databases where you can access the individual files and search them and download them. And with some of these more recent ones, we can't, especially with the data dashboards. So I think for cohort data, if you've got a lot of data and you have some method, even if it's just through summary statistics, and if I have time later on, I can bring up some of the COVID-19 dashboard records that we have, if that helps at all. You would need to have a central website that would allow you to describe your data. You'd have to have information about accessibility. Even we don't require that the data be searchable. We just require that the data be there and it is described adequately. And then it fulfills the conditions of a repository. Does that help at all?
Yeah, so then in that case, so that's the data. If in terms of standards, so if you developed a new ontology, so Melanie through Snicker, they've developed the Gecko ontology, would that come in as a record? And then in the cohort stuff, we've developed in East Africa standard CRFs. So standard case report form. So it's basically sort of standard data elements for specific disease types. Would those be records?
Yeah, well, certainly ontologies are one of our main source of standards records in FAIRsharing. So anytime you create a controlled vocabulary, that's accessible, downloadable, or it's something that definitely we'd like to see in FAIRsharing, especially if it's oriented around a particular use case community, that sort of thing. For the, I would have to look for the case of your other stuff, but we have had, it might fall more under the guidelines or, because it's not strictly a format, but we do have a number of, what are they called? Biomedical, I've forgotten the name now, but it's essentially plans, like guidelines for people who either want to make data that will be used within a larger project or a grant or a funder. And so that often things will go into the guidelines that aren't the sort of historical, of 10 years ago, everyone did their own minimal information guideline. Guidelines is a broader subject than that in FAIRsharing and can encompass a lot of these sort of general requirements for people. It's not a great answer, I'm sorry, but I'd have to have a look at your example.
So there's a question from Melanie. Have you thought about recommended curations based on resource types?
Melanie, recommended curations. So you're saying like, you're going to have to expand upon that, Melanie. Do you think you could do that for me? You could pop yourself off mute.
Sure, I can try. So, for example, biosamples. Mm-hmm. So we maintain the record with the team, but I don't know if there are things that I could add or things that, maybe resources similar to biosamples have added. And so I guess, do you have either, a gold standard resource per data type, for example, or do you have a way of saying, hey, your record's quite nice, but if you were to add that information, it would be so much better. So kind of a suggestion for improvement.
Well, I love that idea. And internally, I guess maybe it's gamification. I feel like everything is sort of gamified. I'm like shiny badges for people who curate their records really well. And I'd really like that. But I think there are other people who say, hang on, we don't want to discourage people who either just have less information about their record or if we don't want to make them feel like they have a mountain to climb. But I do really like the idea of sort of showcasing records. And that we have some ideas for doing that in the new system. And also certainly finding a way to show people what the most important bits are, maybe highlighting which bits of a record's metadata are most important if you wish to align with the FAIR principles more closely, which bits should I target more? Or are you even suggesting that maybe we could do some kind of scan across records and then give our maintainers periodic updates saying, hey, it's been a little while and we notice you don't have any data processes. If if there's a web page that describes data submission or data download, maybe you could just pop that in for us. Is that the sort of thing you were thinking?
I was not thinking that far, but that sounds really cool too.
That's very kind.
Could it be incorporated into the, when you're actually creating your record, you have some recommended fields?
I think that's a great, I
have some ones that are essential, that are compulsory, but you can have some others that are recommended. There's just prompt people to think, do I have that or not?
Yeah, I think that's really good. I'm writing it down. You can see I'm looking down.
Good.
So that's me writing it down.
There's a question from Catherine. How do you verify, it's kind of related, how do you verify or validate connections between related resources? So are the connections provided by data curators or verified by machines looking at matching global standards?
We don't have any automated curation procedures in FAIRsharing. It's all manual. There was a big chunk of data that sometimes will automatically load a bunch of records in, either from some place like AgroPortal or BioPortal. And then as we have time, the curators will go through and refine those. But other than those very specific instances where we have more direct collaborations with other repositories, every single bit of information, including the connections between resources, is done by the curation team. And because it's such, it's time and again, it's the bit of information that people always, our users always come back to us and say, look, it's really important and really relevant. And that just means, unfortunately, spending time on resources websites, because no one ever writes their documentation in exactly the same way. So we need to scour their sites and find out which formats they use, or find out which data repositories they draw some of their data from. And so what we really need, we have someone on the team who is a specialist in NLP, and we're hoping that once the rebuild is finished, we can sort of encourage him to explore the world that is FAIRsharing and all of these resources around in the community, and maybe help us a bit with that. But it's really quite a manual process, and that has its pluses in that you get high quality, but its downsides in that, we only have a certain amount of time in the day to get through it. So we're constantly working on improving that.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Allyson, for the useful information and the discussion.